Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Joy-Filled Universe podcast. I am your host, Lisa Ryan, and today we are going to talk about one of the most powerful and often overlooked forces that can truly have an impact on our lives. And that force? Well, it's our words. That's right. How many of you have been either on the receiving end or even the giving end of some unkind words? I certainly have been both, and in both scenarios, I rarely, if ever, felt satisfied or in a good place afterwards. Now, alternatively, if on the receiving or giving end of kind words, well, that's a whole different story because both feel really lovely and uplifting. Words are, well, they're just kind of like that energetic blueprint that shapes our emotions, beliefs, actions, and even our environment. And crazy enough, the words that we hear more than anyone else's is our own self-talk. And that is the way we speak to ourselves when no one else is listening. The words we quietly message in our minds when we look in the mirror or observe a photo of ourselves or face a setback, or even in a more positive light, when we're dreaming big and launching those rockets of desire off into the universe. This inner dialogue is largely running the show, whether we're aware of it, consciousness, or not, subconsciousness, and we inherit it from our upbringing, our environment, our fears, and our conditioning. And like everything else, we have a choice because self-talk can be either a source of personal power or a source of quiet destruction. And if you're largely finding yourself in the quiet destruction zone, well, then it's time to raise that awareness and take your power back, because living in your own personal power is a super magical place to be. So let's put our focus on taking our power back. Are you ready? Let's go. First, I'm going to start with some groundwork around quantum physics and metaphysics. So wave-particle duality, which is quantum physics, and the influence of words on reality, which is metaphysics, both of which might seem like concepts of two very different worlds, but there's an interesting philosophical and energetic alignment that actually exists between them. In quantum physics, wave-particle duality is the concept that subatomic particles, like electrons and photons, can behave in both particles, which is like solid and tangible, as well as waves, which is energy and potential. And a rather well-known example of this experiment is called the double slit experiment, which finds particles, when not observed, behave like waves, which are probabilities, potentials, and possibilities. But when they are observed or measured, they collapse into particles, being specific, measurable events or outcomes. So if you're now scratching your head and saying to yourself, "Oh, what did you say?" Well, let me just put it to you this way. Are you familiar with paintball guns and how they shoot those little round balls filled with paint? And when they hit you, they like splatter into all different paint colors. Well, imagine you're playing with a paintball gun and there's a wall with two vertical slits cut in it. And behind that wall is like another wall that displays where the paint lands. So if you're shooting your paintballs one at a time, most paintballs will go through one slit or the other. And on that second wall, you'll see like two fairly clear lines where the paintballs hit most often. Well, that is what you would expect to see from subatomic particles that are passing through these slits. So instead of paintballs, picture electrons, the tiny particles of matter, and fire them one at a time through the two slits. You might think that they would behave in the very same way as the paintballs. They go through one slit or the other and make two lines. But when scientists did this with no one watching, something very strange happened. The particles actually created a striped pattern like waves overlapping each other, kind of like ripples on the water. And after observing this, scientists were like really perplexed, and they decided to set up a detector to watch which slit the particles went through. And the moment they did that, the wave pattern disappeared. The particles suddenly behaved like paintballs again. Two lines, no wave behavior. So by simply watching, the outcome changed. Now, what does this mean? Well, particles behave like waves, energy, potential, non-fixed things when they are not being observed. And when you observe them, they collapse into a particle or a specific outcome. So conscious observation changes what reality does. It suggests that reality exists in a state of possibility until something or someone observes or interacts with it. You observing something changes it just by your focused attention. So words that are backed with focused intention are very powerful. Just think, experiments like this suggest that your intention, words, and energy influence how reality collapses into form. Okay, so from a metaphorical perspective, to really drive this home, imagine reality is like a stage behind a curtain. And behind the curtain, all the possible scenes of your life already exist. Love, success, struggle, joy, you name it. Like props and actors just waiting in the darkness. And your attention is like the spotlight. Wherever you shine it, that scene comes to life. The rest, it just stays in the shadow. And before the spotlight hits, every scene is just potential. And once you observe, speak your words, believe, and focus, the curtain lifts and that vision of reality steps forward. So does that help things out? Does that make it a little bit more clear? I hope it does. It actually does for me, that's for sure. And it's always a much easier way of explaining this. But at any rate, the double slit experiment is yielding that reality is a wave of possibilities. Your attention, like the observation piece in the experiment, is the switch that turns potential into actual experience. So the key point around all of this is observation or attention collapses potential into reality. Words backed with intention can be very, very powerful. And why? Because words are vibrational. They carry frequency and intention because they are backed up by emotion, which we've learned is energy in motion. And when spoken, they don't just communicate, they influence energy, perception, belief systems, and even the outcomes we experience in our lives. So our language essentially shapes our inner and outer reality. Key point being, intention and vibration behind words influence how potential manifests into our reality. So to bring these concepts together, wave-particle duality teaches us that the universe is a field of infinite possibilities, and observation collapses those possibilities into reality. Then words powered by emotion and intention act as tools of observation and creation. Language becomes the lens that selects and solidifies your experience from the quantum field. Your beliefs and words influence which version of reality materializes. Okay, now we understand that words can certainly carry power with them because they are fueled with intention, vibration, and focus, all of which are forms of energy. So when you're speaking words like I am abundant, especially when coupled with belief and emotion, you are aligning energy with opportunities and actions that match that frequency. And the same holds true for negative or fear-based words because these are possibilities that are collapsed into outcomes that align with limitation or disconnection. And this whole concept absolutely supports tools like affirmations, prayers, and mantras, which are spoken words, whether internal or external, that have focused intention, which can totally shift your energetic field and influence how our reality unfolds. Also, as we have learned, words are vibrational, and these vibes can attract or resonate with very similar frequencies, aligning circumstances in the physical world. And by the way, this is the very concept that supports that exceedingly popular energetic principle behind the law of attraction, which I totally subscribe to and highly recommend. All right, now whether our words are internal chatter or external messaging, they can all have an impact on us if we choose to believe in them. And there is a pretty famous Japanese researcher named Dr. Masaru Emoto. Masaru Emoto, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who conducted experiments suggesting that words and intentions alter the molecular structure of water. And in this experiment, water samples of like nature were exposed to various stimuli such as words, thoughts, and music. And some of the samples were exposed to positive stimuli, so words like love and gratitude and joy and pleasant classical music and prayers and mantras. And they even exposed them to pleasant images and apparently distant intentions like prayers and thoughts from hundreds of miles away. And then the other specimens of water, well, they were exposed to all the same but just negative aspects. So things like words like you're awful or you're ugly, or loud music that had negative undertones and unpleasant images and those negative distant thoughts, all of that, all from a negative perspective. And this level of exposure was allowed to exist for a set period of time. And then the water samples were frozen and later taken out and placed under a microscope to observe the formed ice crystals. And it was noticed that those samples that were exposed to the positive stimuli, well, they produced like beautiful symmetrical ice crystals. And the samples that were exposed to the negative stimuli, well, they produced like not so beautiful, distorted, asymmetrical crystals, which is very interesting, right? Well, I'm telling you about this experiment mainly because the human body is made up of something like 60 or 70% water. And with the outcome of that experiment in mind, I certainly know which control set I want my personal water crystals to be part of. Frozen or not, I want to be the beautiful water crystals. How about you? What do you think? Which way do you want to go? I think most of us are going to choose the positive side. Okay, so whether it be internal self-talk or the words that we absorb from others while building them into our thought processes, it all impacts us along with the reality that we create for ourselves. All right, so we have now learned about the connection between words and quantum influence and how words carry intention, vibration, and focus, all of which are forms of energy. So if our words are energy, when we message them with intention, they become very creative commands, and they program our subconscious, shape our beliefs, and influence our behavior. So think of it like this. For every I am statement that you make, you're writing like a line of code into your identity and your reality, which begs the question, what reality are you creating with your words? What is the internal self-talk that you routinely run through your body? Personally, I try always to be on a high vibe that is filled with positive affirmations, prayers, and awareness that everything is always working out for my highest good. However, I am human, and pending the circumstances of my life, phases that I might be going through, whatever, I can sometimes be dragged into a place of negative self-talk, which entails words about myself that are very judgy or gossip-like, complaining, or just negative internal chatter. And I even go as far as creating scenarios and playing out like discussions with others in my mind that have never even been had, but I'm still running them through my mind. That internal voice just goes crazy. And since my brain doesn't know the difference between reality and make-believe, I can only imagine the impact that these scenarios are having on my body. All of those what if fear-based thoughts that absolutely do not serve me one single bit, but they can and they do sometimes exist. And my mental movie plays almost every time I land in a low vibe state. Words like, I'm so bad at this, or I always screw things up, or nobody values me, or I'm all by myself and feel all alone, or I bet they aren't calling or messaging me back because they don't care. And you know what? These aren't just thoughts, they're affirmations, they're repeated words, which we know can become beliefs. And through their word power that we're learning about, they can become our reality and keep us stuck in fear, lack, and unworthiness. Now, when I decided to create this pod outline about the power of words, I did an experiment with myself, and I got this idea from a bunch of different books that I had been reading in the past. They all kind of mentioned this. And you might want to give it a try too, because it can be pretty enlightening. It's called a judgment journal experiment. And the goal of this experiment is discovering how often you harshly apply how often you harshly apply words of judgment towards people, including yourself. And you learn that by changing your language, you can change how you feel. Now, you can be fancy and go get yourself a journal. However, I actually really adore journals, and I'm not about to waste one on recording largely negative messaging. That's just me. So I literally just use the notes application on my iPhone, and you can even just go ahead and use a plain piece of paper too, however you want to do it. So I created the following sections in my little application. One was judgment, which is largely like, what is the judgy thing that I'm saying or running through my head? And then the reframe, which I'll get to that, but it's how are we reframing what we're saying. And then this section, it said self or other, which is really kind of like an S or an O, because that's basically saying, was my judgment targeted towards me, or was it targeted towards someone else? Sorry, I'm running into words. I'm talking about words and I can hardly get my words straight. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've got our 3 sections. Well, every time for an entire day that I caught myself thinking or saying a judgy phrase or thought, I would jot it down. Not editing it, just jot it down under the judgment heading and then check whether or not it was self or other. So things like, they're so lazy. I don't think anybody appreciates what I do. Sorry, I'm looking at my phone. Am I invisible? Does anyone hear me? I probably deserve that comment. Must be nice. And the list goes on and on. So then at the end of the day, I scanned the list and I rated them on a scale of 1 to 5 about how they made me feel. 1 being low vibe, 5 being rather neutral. And then I reframed the statements with something more compassionate. Like, instead of they're so lazy, I said, they haven't met the deadline. Maybe they're overwhelmed with other tasks. Or I don't think anyone appreciates what I do. And I changed that to, I know that my efforts move the needle every day and the team relies on me and my talent. And then I probably deserve that comment, which I reframed to being, the negative words that people speak have nothing to do with me, and I hope they find peace. So you get the flick. And as I reframed, I found myself physically feeling better. However, the harsh truth for me was the tally count. I like to think I'm a person who assumes positive intent. However, I had close to 250 ticks of negative messaging, and about 85% of those was internal self-talk. And the average feeling rating was around a 2 as well, and that means largely low vibe. And some of the most triggering judgments that I made were about my appearance, my hair, my weight, my clothes, my makeup, my complexion, my posture. I mean, seriously, I never really realized how critical I could be of myself. And now I certainly didn't go through and reframe every statement, but I did notice lots of repeats and I reframed a lot of those. And when I did, I started to feel better. I also noticed when reframing that some of the judgments didn't even make sense to me, which gave me awareness towards the fact that if I'm in a slump during my day, I tend to take it out on myself versus just letting the emotions pass through me and move on. So if you choose to do this experiment, when you review your journal, notice the number of self-directed or externally directed judgments you made and notice how many of them are duplicates or more. And if there aren't a ton of them, rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 to get the idea of how these statements made you feel. And if there are a bunch, like with me, just go through and rate the more common ones, because you'll be surprised how many of them are repeats. So rate the ones that are most common or commonly coming up, or the ones that really stuck out for you. And then reframe those statements. And after reframing, do a body scan and see how the reframes made you feel. Did they make you feel better and authentic? Or did the reframe feel kind of forced? And if that awareness comes to light, then be curious and pay some more attention there to find out, why is that? What is the root of that feeling? Now, aside from the awareness above, a silver lining that these steps also aided me in was reducing that automatic emotional charge. It forced me to pause for a second because I was writing it down and externalizing it versus internalizing it. And also by reframing, I found myself rewiring my perception and assumptions. For example, lazy for overwhelmed with other tasks. I shifted from blame to being curious. In fact, the more we build up this awareness and practice the reframe, because you don't always have to journal it. You can just make this a catch and reframe kind of practice, because as you build up that awareness, you're going to catch yourself doing it and immediately reframe it. And the more you do, you will move out of initially judging and move into having more kinder, compassionate responses that will certainly give your spirit a sense of calm and peace. All right, so above and beyond the judgment journal, here are some other practical tools that can be easily applied starting today when it comes to both internal and external words. So hit pause, right? Before speaking, pause. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it empowering? And by building this awareness, you are positioning yourself to respond rather than react. And this works with both internal self-talk and external messaging. Another thing you can do is the I am check-in. This is a self-awareness tool that gives you the opportunity to insert a word that best aligns with how you are feeling in a given moment. Every time you say I am, you are creating an identity. So perhaps your self-talk can sound like, I am curious, I am resilient, I am living into my purpose, I am loved because I am loving. And something that I mentioned at the beginning of this pod was that for every I am statement that you make, it is like writing a line of code into your identity and your reality. Okay, so another tool is the stop, cancel, clear, and replace. I use this all the time. I actually couple it with a full circle of clapping my hands in front of me. I start at the 12 o'clock position and I go clockwise in a full circle while clapping my hands in front of me. And I learned this clapping from a dear friend, as it acts like a way of breaking up all those vibes in your electromagnetic field, and you're kind of deleting them. So when I catch myself saying something that is really disempowering, I immediately say, stop, cancel, clear. I'm removing this fear right out of here. And I do this while I'm clapping my hands. And then I replace it with a much more empowering truth. For example, I may say, I'll never be successful. Wait, stop, cancel, clear. I'm removing this fear right out of here. And then with that negativity cleared, I replace it with, I am successful every day because I'm figuring this out and the universe is aligning all of my resources that will present themselves in perfect timing. Thank you. Which always feels a whole lot better. And I absolutely love just the clapping because it feels like it just resets my electromagnetic field. So give it a shot. It's kind of fun. And even if you don't want to do the clapping, you can snap, whatever you want to do, or do nothing at all. But stop, cancel, clear, and replace. All right, affirmations and the mirror method, inspired by the late, great Louise Hay. I talk a lot about affirmations and we'll have to do a pod on them one time. But for now, try starting your day with 3 to 5 powerful affirmations. Say them out loud in the mirror as you lock eyes with yourself. So for example, I speak life into my goals. My words align with my purpose. I am a powerful creator. I am beautiful. I am worthy. I am loved. I am proud of myself. Thank you for being awesome. Okay, so we will talk more about this another day. However, I want to share that according to studies at the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, when people practice affirmations and compassionate self-talk, they build resilience, they experience high levels of motivation and creativity, and they bounce back from setbacks faster. So self-talk literally shapes your neurobiology. Your brain is always listening. And also, as messaged by the tremendous Louise Hay, she says, quote, mirror work isn't just about saying nice things. It's about rebuilding trust and love in the most important relationship, the one you have with yourself. Thank you, Louise Hay. You're a gem. Okay, so basically, when you're speaking differently to yourself, you begin thinking differently, and that is where transformation begins. Now, before we finish up this week's pod, I want to take a quick minute and put some extra focus on how we receive unkind words from others, because that can have the same impact on us as our own words and self-talk. Remember that water experiment? Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's coming from internal you or if it's coming from an external human. Either way, they can both be very impactful and really knock you back on your heels. So whether it's someone you love or care deeply about, or a random person that just unleashes that unwarranted fit of road rage and lashes out and speaks unkindly to you, it's important to know that their words are a reflection of their own inner storm, not your worth. And when experiencing a situation like that, some ways to hold your center and not take it personally are acknowledging the emotional impact, right? It hurts when people we love speak from a place of anger. And it can also hurt when a perfect stranger speaks to us from a place of anger. So acknowledge the emotional impact. Got it. I'm aware. And then give yourself grace and normalize the reaction. Because guess what, folks? It's not outside of the norm to wonder if it's your fault. It's totally normal to find yourself in that posture. And then also remind yourself that what people say in anger is rarely ever about you. It's a mirror of their own unprocessed pain. When people are angry and they lash out, they are often trying to just offload pain that they don't know how to manage. And that's kind of where that saying hurt people comes from. And are you familiar with the second part of that saying? It goes, hurt people, and healed people hold space. So what does holding space look like? It means pause and create space between the stimulus and the response. Don't match energy. Matching anger with anger is like pouring gasoline onto a fire. And remind yourself that this isn't about me. It's not about me. And if you need to, call a timeout, right? Ask to take a break. Set a time to come back together and walk away to protect your peace. And while you're allowing for that space, remind yourself that the way people react and behave is their responsibility. It's not your fault if someone is upset. Also, affirm to yourself that you are not responsible for how others choose to express their pain. And since I have been quoting Louise Hay a bunch today, I also want to add an affirmation of hers that I carry with me all the time, and it is this: I am not responsible for others' reactions. I lovingly detach and honor my peace. I'll say that again. I am not responsible for others' reactions. I lovingly detach and honor my peace. So whether it be an unkind internal self-talk or words received from external humans, protect and honor your peace. And remember, it has absolutely nothing to do with your worth as a human, because you're awesome. And I will say that every day if I have to. Okay, well, this has been quite an episode. It's been very packed with words for sure. So who knew that words that we speak could have so much influence and power over our reality? I, for one, especially since I created this pod outline, have become more and more aware of what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it, because our words are vibrations infused with conscious intent. And if consciousness influences the quantum world and words are expressions of consciousness, then our words are creative forces in the quantum field that shapes potential into our reality. Also, when you become aware of negative self-talk, pause, apply some of the tools that we discussed today, and perhaps even ask yourself, would you ever say these words to someone that you love? And if the answer is no, then why are you speaking them to yourself? Be good to you. Remember, you're awesome. And you know what? Rewire that inner critic. Take your power back when that negative mental movie tries to monopolize your mind. Get it back. It belongs to you. You deserve to stand in your most powerful, most beautiful self. So you can heal with your words. You can create with your words. You can choose to speak light So do that and choose to speak love, because every time you do, you're not just changing your mindset, you're changing your reality and your destiny. And I'm going to give Louise Hay a little bit of a break, but I am going to go ahead and quote another favorite of mine, Mr. Bob Proctor, the late great Bob Proctor. And he said, "Your words are the paintbrush of your mind. They color every experience you have." And with that, I hope that you found today's episode to be helpful and applicable to your world. If you did, please help me out with elevating this pod on Apple and Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can do this by rating, following, writing a review, and sharing it with a friend. All of this is super helpful and only takes a few seconds. So thank you for your support. On that note, my name is Lisa Ryan. This is the Joy-Filled Universe podcast, where we explore all the tools and tricks that are going to make your universe even more joyful than it already is. I'll chat with you next week. Bye.